So reports are suggesting that Amazon Prime and ITV could be about to drop Jeremy Clarkson, everyone's favourite motor-mouth TV presenter. And this is on the back of a row that began with a row he's having with Meghan Markle over a column he wrote in December. The column talked about how much he hated Meghan Markle, hates her on a cellular level, wants to see her dragged through the streets, pelted with excrement in the nude. And he's apologised several times, but still people are trying to... People want his head on a platter, essentially. Tom, what have you made of this?
What I think is quite interesting about this case in particular is, first of all, how it does feel like the kind of world has changed around us. You know, Jeremy Clarkson would get into one of these scandals every couple of years, essentially. You know, there was the one not too long ago where I think on the One show he said that striking workers, he would happily kind of take them outside and shoot them in front of their families and stuff, and he had to apologise and so on and so forth. We go through this dance every 3 or 4 years, it seems like, with Jeremy Clarkson. And yet at this point, if the reports from Variety and elsewhere are to be believed, he's really on the verge of being dropped, even at places like Amazon Prime, where his shows are wildly popular. And he's obviously an asset. So they're not doing this to kind of discreetly get rid of someone that was probably on the way out anyway. In that, you kind of see how much the world has changed. Now, that particular column, you know, as you say, he's apologised for it. There are a lot of people who, it was close to the bone even by his standards, let's just say. But one thing that is missed about all of this is the fact that he was joking. I mean, amidst all the discussion about this being effectively an incitement to violence and incitement to misogyny, it was this kind of botched attempt at extreme kind of hyperbole, just trying to express how much he hates this individual with this apparent Game of Thrones reference and so on. It was a joke that didn't work and that struck many people as too much, a bit obscene and unpleasant. But at the same time, I think the fact that it was a joke has been lost on many people, not least Harry and Meghan, who have responded to Clarkson's second apology. And apparently he emailed Harry in particular in person to apologise on Christmas Day of all times, by suggesting, he's got a pattern of behaviour in terms of stirring up hatred, and I think I even said conspiracy theories. I don't know what that's necessarily a reference to.
Hate, misogyny and conspiracy theories was what Team Meghan describes.
Which again,
output as.
It's just like this stuff just comes out without regardless of what the situation is. But at the same time, what I think is interesting is reading that apology, the one that he issued this week, it does kind of sound like he means it. I might be wrong. Maybe I'm being really naive, but he talks about how the accusation of misogyny really stings, because he was like, for all the things we used to get in trouble for on Top Gear, which used to happen quite often, we never used to make women can't park jokes, all this kind of stuff. It seems to have upset him. Even his daughter was upset him and so on. And so what we kind of see here is he's done everything that the councillors have asked of him. So he's issued not one but 2 grovelling apologies. He's retracted the article in question. He's also promised to do better. In his second public apology, he talks about how from now on I will be more careful, even if it blunts my edge, essentially is what he says. But it's still not enough. Because I think cancel culture isn't really about accountability. It's about censorship. It's about punishing people. It's about taking people down. It's about claiming scalps. And I think in this particular situation, you have someone who, putting the original offence to one side, as it were, has kind of behaved precisely how the advocates of cancel culture expect them to behave. And yet it's still not good enough. And I think that's pretty telling.
Is the lesson from this, Luke? Don't apologise to the woke. Stand your ground. Stand up for free speech. Don't give them an inch.
Definitely. I think that is one lesson. I think on the column itself, I do think there is this thing amongst the advocates of cancel culture to effectively ignore the context in which things are said. So, for example, this joke, I agree, it was completely poor taste, obscene and wrong, all the rest of it. But it was a reference to Game of Thrones and a reference to a specific character within Game of Thrones, a royal figure who has been dragged out into the public and pelted with excrement, right? And the reason he used that metaphor was not because she was a woman who he actually did want to see dragged through the street. It's because she was a figure of great, royal status that he wanted to see dragged down. That was what the joke meant. And everyone knew what the joke meant. And I'm not a Clarkson fan. I never have been and I never will be. But I do think there is this willful ignoring of the way things are told and the way things are presented. And also, I think, radical, and I'm not saying this is true of Jeremy Clarkson, but we do have a proud history in this country of taking the piss out of royalty and out of ministers, government, and being quite rude about them.
Yeah, certainly in much more offensive ways than Clarkson.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and often going much, much further than Clarkson did. So I do think that if we are to have any hope of a kind of maintaining that tradition of mockery, satire, and bringing people down a peg, then columns like Clarkson's have to survive. Now, we don't have the kind of writers that we used to. Clarkson certainly isn't one of them, and probably has one eye on the fact that everything he writes is going to be subject to people's PR teams and will therefore willingly kind of prostrate himself in front of them in order to keep a commercial contract, which I think is a real shame. We need more people who are willing to say, no, I'm not going to change my words. I meant it. Those writers are out there, people who tend to get away with quite serious things that they say in their columns, but we need more of them.
Yeah. And Tom, isn't there a bit of a pattern here? You know, when it comes to Meghan Markle, it's if you're not allowed to insult her. You think about, you know, Piers Morgan getting the sack for calling her quite dubious claims on Oprah into doubt. We had the head of the Society of Editors who was sacked for defending the press treatment of her.
No, I mean, it feels like Meghan Markle's on like a one-woman mission to prove that cancel culture really does exist, because her like body count at this point is incredible. Yeah. In relation to the number of people, it's the way in which Meghan Mania kind of ripped through the British media and claimed so many scouts. Piers Morgan, as you say, who was actually vindicated somewhat in what he was saying. You know, basically saying he didn't believe a word she said. There's been a lot of claims that she has made that have since been proven to be utter fantasy, basically. The Society of Editors forced out was a consequence of journalists actually saying, no, we are
racist.
We are racist. And how dare you suggest that we're not, Mr. President of the Society of Editors, which is very, very strange. And now Clarkson, again, someone who, you know, maybe isn't uncancelable on the kind of J.K. Rowling level, but is relatively close. So it really does show the kind of power of the sort of elite hysteria that Meghan Mania sort of represented. I suppose just quickly on the apologise thing, because I agree, I would rather he didn't apologise. I don't think he's really got much to apologise for beyond making the sort of joke that Jeremy Clarkson always makes. Like Luke, not really a huge fan of that kind of public school pub bore shtick, but it's a shtick. It's not an incitement to violence against whoever it is that he's tirading about in any particular instance. But one thing I thought was interesting, if we do take this to be genuine, I think it says something about the culture that we now live in, which is that even if you do genuinely feel like you've messed up, apologising is now kind of a mug's game. Yeah. Not only because you have to accept the wild overreaction to what you're saying, that your speech wasn't just something that was in poor taste, but it was violence, it was ginning up hatred against someone, etc., etc. Not only just because it feeds the beast, but because it's almost just gotten to a situation where, even though we're told that cancel culture is accountability culture, it's about making people see the error of their ways and so on, it's not within anyone's interest to, even if they feel like they have done something wrong, said something they wish they hadn't have said, it's not within their interest at all to say anything about it, to actually own up, to fess up, whatever, because they know that won't save them. So in a weird sort of way, it also kind of, even though I wish he hadn't apologised, it also shows that it's almost become impossible to apologise, even if you want to now. And that's also quite a grim consequence of all of this, I guess.